You know, in our totally connected world, moving to a new country feels more common than ever. But have you ever really stopped to think about what that journey actually involves? It's so much more than just packing a bag and hopping on a plane. It's this huge psychological and social shift. So today, we're going to dive deep and break down that entire journey, from the moment someone decides to leave to the really complex process of trying to find your place in a whole new world.
And just to give you a sense of the sheer scale we're talking about, look at this number. Back in 2012, there were already 232 million international migrants. That was over 3% of the entire world's population. And you can bet that number's only gone up since then. So this isn't some small niche topic. It's a huge force that's shaping our modern world, which makes understanding this journey more important than ever.
All right, to get our heads around this, we've broken the whole journey down into 5 key parts. We're going to start with the big picture. Why do people move in the first place? Then, we'll get into the nitty-gritty of culture shock. After that, we'll look at the different ways people adapt, the social hurdles they often face, and finally, we'll talk about the real strategies for thriving in a new culture.
Okay, so first things first, migration in a global era. To really get a handle on the journey, we have to start at the very beginning. What makes people move?
So, what kicks off this massive movement of people? Well, it often boils down to 2 simple forces, what we call push factors and pull factors. Push factors are all the negative things that, well, push someone out of their home country. Things like a bad economy, political instability, or even natural disasters. And then you have the pull factors. These are like magnets, drawing people to a new place, the promise of a good job, better schools, or just a safer life.
And all of this movement creates something we call a diaspora. I love this word. It actually comes from the Greek for to sow seeds, which is just a perfect image, right? It's this idea of communities being spread all across the globe, far from their original home, but still holding on to these really powerful connections to their roots and to each other. It's like a global network built on shared culture.
All right, so a person makes the move. They arrive. What's that very first encounter like? Now we're zooming in from the big global reasons for moving to the intense personal experience of arrival. And this is where you run smack into culture shock.
And look, culture shock is way more than just missing your favorite foods. I want you to imagine that every single social rule you take for granted just disappears. How you say hello, how you order a coffee, what's considered polite or funny, it's all brand new. That constant feeling of being off balance, the confusion and anxiety, that's the heart of culture shock.
This emotional roller coaster is so common that researchers have actually mapped it out. They call it the U-curve. It starts with the honeymoon phase. Everything is new, it's exciting, it's fascinating. But then comes the dip. That's disintegration. The little frustrations start to build up. But hang in there, because then you start to climb back up during reorientation, where you're figuring things out, learning the ropes, and finally, you hit adaptation, where you actually start to feel comfortable, maybe even at home.
But here's a twist that catches almost everyone by surprise. Culture shock can hit you even harder when you go back home. It's called reverse culture shock. You land, and you expect everything to be just as you left it, but it's not. And even more importantly, you've changed. That disconnect between what you expect and the reality can be way more jarring than the first move ever was.
So once that initial shock starts to fade, what happens next? This is where we get into our third section, the long-term game of figuring out your place in a new society. It's a process called acculturation.
Acculturation is all about that long-term adjustment. It's this constant balancing act, really. On one hand, you have this need to fit in and connect with the new society around you. But on the other hand, there's this really powerful desire to hold on to your own culture, your own identity.
So how do people actually navigate that balancing act? Well, a sociologist named John Barry came up with a great model. He said it all comes down to how you answer 2 huge questions. First, is it important for me to hold on to my own heritage, my original culture? And second, is it important for me to build relationships and get involved with the new, host society? And depending on your answers, you end up on one of 4 different paths. If you answer yes to both, you want to keep your culture and engage with the new one, that's integration. If you say no to your heritage but yes to the new society, that's assimilation. If you hold tight to your own culture and keep your distance from the new one, that's called separation. And finally, if you feel disconnected from both your old culture and the new one, that's marginalization.
Now, it's so easy to think that this is all on the immigrant, that it's all up to them to adapt. But that's only half the story. The attitude of the host society plays a massive role, which brings us to the psychology of us versus them. And this is absolutely critical to understand. An immigrant can want to integrate with all their heart, but if the host society isn't welcoming, it's just not going to happen. A culture that's open can pave the way for integration, but a culture that's resistant can put up walls, and that can push people into separation or even marginalization, no matter what they want.
So why does that resistance even happen? Well, a really useful way to think about this is something called integrated threat theory. The core idea is that prejudice often comes from a feeling, a perception, that the outgroup, in this case immigrants, poses some kind of threat to the in-group, which is the host society. The theory breaks this perceived threat down into four main types. First, you've got realistic threats. This is about tangible stuff, like the fear that immigrants are going to take our jobs. Then there are symbolic threats. This is more about culture, the worry that our values or our way of life is going to change. Then, of course, there's the threat from negative stereotypes, just classic prejudice. And finally, there's intergroup anxiety, which is really just that awkward personal fear of saying or doing the wrong thing when you're talking to someone from a different background.
Okay, so we've seen all these challenges, both personal and social. So what's the way forward? How do we make this work? That brings us to our last section, the practical strategies that can help people and societies adapt successfully. The ultimate goal here for anyone living in a new culture is what we call cross-cultural adaptation. It's all about becoming more fit for that new environment. It's not just about surviving, it's about actually thriving.
So what does it take to thrive? Well, research points to 4 big keys. First, learn the culture. Be curious. Be a student of your new home. Second, master the skills. You got to know how to handle the day-to-day stuff like banking or public transit. Third, and this one is so important, build friendships. Real, genuine relationships across cultures are the single fastest way to bridge those gaps. And finally, accept the differences. You have to learn to be flexible and open-minded instead of fighting against everything that feels unfamiliar.
So what's the big takeaway here? I think it's that the migrant's journey is a two-way street. It's this really complex dance between one person's effort to adjust and an entire society's willingness to adjust with them. And when we understand these models and these pressures, we can see past the simple headlines and start to appreciate the deeply human story at the heart of it all.
And this whole discussion leads us to one of the most fundamental questions of our time. How do we build societies that are both diverse and unified? To what extent should we encourage migrants to maintain their heritage? And how does a country balance that with creating a shared common identity? There really is no easy answer. What do you think?